World Insight coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, China's long-anticipated Shenzhen-Hong Kong Stock Connect gets the green light. Beijing's latest step forward in opening up Chinese financial markets to the world. Will this all investors hope for? And the Chinese team Wings Gaming emerged the champions of the 2016 International Dota 2 Championships in a historic win that turned all 5 members millionaires overnight. What does this mean for China's fast-growing esports industry? The Central Bank of China has approved the launch of the long-awaited Shenzhen-Hong Kong Stock Connect program. This week, it allows trading between Hong Kong and Shenzhen, and is expected to be the world's second busiest and tech-heavy exchange. Before moving on to our discussion about it and its impact, let's take a look at this backgrounder.
A green light for the final links of an ambitious plan to connect Hong Kong to mainland markets. The Shenzhen-Hong Kong Stock Connect program will give foreign investors more access to Chinese stocks, and Beijing appears to strengthen its case for the inclusion of Chinese shares in global index providers. It will provide mutual stock market access between Hong Kong and Shenzhen through a northbound trading link and a southbound trading link. The government has been reforming the country's capital market with more openness towards international markets. A similar program connecting Shanghai and Hong Kong markets started in 2014. So expectations are high for the new one.
In terms of the overall changes, most important and significant is the abolition of the aggregate quota, abolished. ETF will be included, and there are a number of issues that we have to sort it out regulatorily and system-wise so that we can include them in 2017.
That's one of the key features of the new scheme. No overall limits. This has been a sticking point for big institutional investors on market access issues. The chairman of Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing says it marks another important step in opening China's capital markets and will help boost Hong Kong's global status. Premier Li Keqiang says the move marks a solid step towards a better legal structure and globalization of China's capital market. The hope is that investors in Hong Kong and mainland markets will soon have an additional secure, reliable channel for investment in other markets, an environment that both sides are familiar with.
And for more on the latest development of the Shenzhen-Hong Kong Stock Connect in Hong Kong, we're having 2 panelists with us. Mr. Xiao Geng, Professor of Finance and Public Policy at the University of Hong Kong. Also in Hong Kong joining us, Mr. Ronald Wan, Chief Executive at Partners Capital International. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. It's great news, certainly. Many of us have already heard news earlier in the week. The question is, when is this scheme likely to be implemented, and what is likely to be the real impact, at least in the near term? Professor Xiao.
Well, according to the report, this will be implemented within 4 months. This is very important. This is like the basic infrastructure, market infrastructure to connect the China and the outside world. And after Shanghai and Shenzhen is a critical component, and this creates actually a little bit of competition between Shenzhen and Shanghai, and gives Hong Kong the opportunity to improve its exposure to both Chinese market and overseas market.
Is this shooting 2 birds with 1 stone, Mr. Wan? On the one hand, give Hong Kong further opportunity. On the other hand, give the mainland financial market a further opening up capability.
Yes, I think the Shenzhen Hong Kong Stock Connect is a very good opportunity for the reform of the Chinese Asia stock market, because we've seen the opening up of the Shanghai market. That is basically focusing on the bigger companies with bigger capitalizations. Basically, in the Shenzhen market, we see smaller and medium-sized company. So we see the full opening of the Chinese market, among all sizes. Basically allow the investors to come into the Chinese markets. At the same time, because of of the Chinese, stock brokerage house. They have operations overseas, and basically they can channel the money and investors, through the cross-border trade. I think it reflects a gradual opening up of the Chinese market and will improve the regulations and everything.
Well, we'll leave some of the other details later in our discussion. For now, I'm also told that we are having already Mr. Nicholas Lardy, Anthony Solomon Senior Fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. Mr. Lardy, welcome to our program as well. But the question is, I want to address to you, is that going to be attractive? How attractive is it to the international investors?
Well, I think it's going to be very attractive over time. It may not be an immediate, huge success, but I think this is a very, very important step. And I would highlight the fact that it's not just the Shenzhen Connect with Hong Kong that's being announced, but the cap on the Shanghai-Hong Kong Connect, the aggregate cap on the amount of funds that can flow, has been lifted. And there's no aggregate quota for the Shenzhen-Hong Kong Connect. So this is a very, very important step in opening up capital account convertibility. After all, it's the equity controls that have been the most strict in China's system. And with the cap completely lifted and both markets pretty much open with some exceptions, I think it's a very important step in China's opening its capital account.
Right. In order to understand the significance of it, probably we need to understand why it takes so long before this becomes a reality. Therefore, I would like to go back to Professor Xiao. You probably have more information and more understanding than the other two guests about this issue. So, Professor Xiao, why does it take so long? I mean, 2 years already since the Shanghai, Hong Kong. Is it a fair question for you, Professor Xiao?
Well, 2 years actually is very short. The
Okay.
idea of this connect originates probably 15 years ago. And this is a very important innovation, because the connect and also the link, they actually is a risk management process. If you try to open immediately the China market, it will probably create chaos. So the idea of providing a few tunnels, so to gradually open the market connected to huge market, this is really not just innovative but very, very significant. Without the China market, the existing global market in New York, in London, in Hong Kong, they are not global, and without Chinese access to overseas market, also, the Chinese market is not global. So this is so significant, and also has potentially a lot of risks. That's why it takes so long,
Well, it's almost like opening up the channels that are crucial for this connect, as you said, between China and the rest of the world. Here is a quote that seemed to coincide with what you said, Professor. The Chinese Premier Li Keqiang said earlier that the rollout of the Shenzhen-Hong Kong Stock Connect after the Shanghai-Hong Kong Stock Link marks another concrete step for China's capital market in becoming more law-based, market-oriented, and also global. That's the quote coming from the Chinese Premier. He was the one signing on it. Yet, having said that though, Mr. Lardy, we didn't forget there has been quite some turbulences in China's stock market, to say the least, last year. And later we see this year some new developments, certainly all of you said supposed to be exciting. So how should we understand the uncertainties and the new development? How is the new development likely to solve some of the problems that have been emerging or becoming obvious with the last turbulence?
Well, I think opening up the Shenzhen market to the Connect program will give, in the long run, hopefully more stability to the market, because many of the northbound investors ultimately are going to be institutional investors with a longer-term view. So the retail share of the Shenzhen market presumably will decline, and the institutional share will rise. So I think, on average, that's going to be helpful in terms of reducing volatility in the market.
Mr. Van, do you agree?
Yes, I agree. I think the schemes basically will allow investors from both sides to take part in the transactions, and also it will bring more stability and more market reality to the valuation of the Chinese market, because we've seen the valuation in Asia, in particular in Shenzhen market, it's particularly high. If the gradual opening up of the market will introduce more, down-to-earth, valuation approach and investment approach, I think it will help the Chinese market to reform and to reflect more market reality and less volatility and less, fluctuation in future.
All of you talk about reform, but the question is also crucial, not just the issue of reform itself, but also how fast the reform will be done. We understand, Professor Xiao, the Shanghai and Shenzhen stock market combined together, $7.4 trillion US. That is the capital. It is supposed to be the second largest of the world when they are combined. And yet, as we all know, it needs to be reformed and needs to be updated when it comes to its operational system compared to the international practices. Professor Xiao, how fast, really, that is the thing?
Well, just like the highway, depending on how good the highway is, how fast you can run on the highway. So that's why the connect is very important, because it actually introduces not just the trading system, but also exposes Chinese companies to the international practices, laws and regulations, as practiced in Hong Kong, which are very similar to the global practice. So the implication is actually motivating potential companies. They would like to be listed both in Hong Kong and in China. They will see that once they are listed in any of these two places, they were faced with global investors, high quality institutional investors, and also subject to the modern practice, international practice. So this is really exciting news for long-term investors.
Mr. Lardy, how challenging will that learning curve be for Chinese companies?
Well, I think these companies have made very substantial progress over the years. After all, there are some that are listed in both markets. China has imposed regulations that have required over time an increasing amount of disclosure of financial information. So I think they're fairly far along. And as Xiaogong said, this will give them an additional incentive to come up to international standards, but I think they're fairly far along.
We have witnessed, Mr. Lardy, some of the previous cases among Chinese companies who have been listed overseas, and yet with certain kinds of attractive policies, believed at the time from China, they come back again. And yet it seems that some of them were not necessarily adjusting themselves very well to then the ever-evolving situation from the Chinese stock market to the various kinds of regulations of China's financial markets. So many would wonder, will this new thing necessarily going to be a dependable and stable source for innovation, for exposure to the outside world, and also for financial reform? Mr. Lardy, frankly speaking.
Well, I think yes, I think the companies that want to change their listings from offshore to onshore are doing it primarily for valuation reasons. As I think Mr. Wan mentioned, the multiples, particularly in the Shenzhen market, are very high. So if a company can move its listing to the domestic market, its valuation might go up significantly, and that's certainly what some of these companies are looking for as they consider moving their listing. And I think in the future, given the huge opening of the market that we're seeing now, the advantages of listing in New York or Hong Kong are going to be very substantially diminished because international investors will be able to access companies listed not only in Shanghai but also in Shenzhen. And most importantly, no restrictions on the total amount of foreign ownership. This is a big, big breakthrough.
It is a big, big breakthrough. And as you said, it could be very attractive for the foreign investors. And yet you said, Mr. Lardy, earlier, it may not necessarily have an immediate effect. Mr. Wan, what do you think?
I think these schemes will basically make the Shenzhen and Shanghai stock market more attractive. In terms of the opening up of the market, in terms of improving corporate governance, and basically it will attract more mainland domestic company migrating from the offshore market back to the Chinese market. But it is a long process because we see that there are a lot of improvement needs to be done in terms of regulation and governance and various issues, as we have seen in last year's market performance. In particular, the market drastic slow down. So basically, I think it's a long process. But overall, I'm optimistic about the improvement of the Chinese rules, and basically I think more quality investors and more quality companies will go back to mainland Asia's market.
On the one hand, of course, there's the issue of speed. On the other hand, there is also the issue of reform vis-a-vis risks. Professor Xiao, do you think the Chinese side have studied some possible or most of the possible scenarios when they are making the decision about Shanghai and now about Shenzhen and Hong Kong?
Well, definitely, this is the whole idea of this connect and link is actually to make sure the risks are controllable, and they are gradually relaxing those constraints. And this is basically a very successful process. When Shanghai started first, and the implementation of the Shenzhen means that they are already confident about the previous experiments in Shanghai. And I think in the future it actually may expand to other market like derivative or even connection with London or New York, and those are potentials. So I think this is a very important signal about the long-term confidence by the authority and also by the market.
On the other hand, what about the issue of Hong Kong? We've seen some ups and downs in terms of the social stability in Hong Kong. We've also seen certain kinds of strains strained times when it comes to relations between Hong Kong and the mainland. And the people have been saying, what about Hong Kong when it comes to its competitive edge against or toward some of the other major mainland cities, such as Shenzhen, such as Shanghai? Will they be still willing to work with Hong Kong for the future? Will this give a guarantee for Hong Kong? How much will Hong Kong cherish this guarantee in a way? And how competitive will Hong Kong become as a result of this? Mr. Wan.
Yes, well, I think as we have seen from the various issues, from the cooperations between Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Hong Kong, it means that central government still want to give Hong Kong an opportunity, to outperform and outgrow the other cities, and Hong Kong still has the priority to prove that it is the Chinese, international city. So basically, I think it gives Hong Kong's market firsthand and give some sort of privilege to the Hong Kong market practitioner as well. So basically, I think that Hong Kong should take this opportunity to growth its financial market, and to take this opportunity to develop further its offshore market and stock market to regain its competitiveness. I think it reflects the support from the central government, and Hong Kong from all sectors, all layers should take hold of this opportunity to demonstrate that Hong Kong still has a role to play, given that Hong Kong is already the largest offshore financial market, renminbi offshore market, and also is the premier Chinese offshore market as well.
Mr. Lardy, before we wrap up, I would like to ask you about this once again. That is the speed of China's financial reform. This specific theme, together with the Shanghai, Hong Kong, has been talked about for 15 years. And eventually, it's been realized. And yet that makes us wonder, what about the other threads of the overall picture of China's financial reform? How long can we expect it to be a process likely to be completed somewhat? Mr. Lardy.
Yes, well, I think that, you know, if you look across the whole spectrum of reform activities going on in China, let's say since the third plenum several years ago, I think the financial sector has been the most successful in reform. It has completely liberalized interest rates. It has now, several months ago, has moved to open the interbank bond market, not just to institutional investors, but to all international investors. Now the market has been completely opened on the equity side as well, particularly because of the lifting of the quota that restricted the total amount of foreign equity ownership. And if you look also at a number of other things related to monetary policy, I think financial reform has moved ahead at a very, very brisk pace in China. There are some risks. Too much credit has been created. But I think on balance, you'd have to give very high marks to the pace of financial reform. It's actually accelerated somewhat since the third plenum.
Right.
Whereas in many other areas, it's very hard to see such progress.
All right. And final words from you, Professor Xiao, very briefly, 30 seconds for you.
Well, yes, China is building a very good highway now, and although we didn't see any cars yet, we will see a lot of cars in the future. So that's the way I see it.
All right. I hope there's no traffic jam. Anyway, Xiaogang, Ronald Wan, Nicholas Lardy, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Stay with us here on World Insight. We've got our final segment coming right up. Chinese Dota 2 team wins gaming, sweeps to victory at the most prestigious esports tournament ever held, taking home the top prize of $9 million in a historic win. How big are the ripple effects for China's esports industry? Welcome back. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News. Esports, once treated as addiction for teenagers, has become a booming industry globally. At the recent Dota 2 international tournament, the team from China, Wings Gaming, won first place and took home $9 million in prize money. Has playing esports become a high-paying job? What's in store for the industry, which on the surface is hard for some to take seriously? Let's take a look at this before we discuss it.
Meet the world champions from China. The Chinese squad, Wings, emerged the champions of the International 2016, the biggest Dota 2 event in the history of esports last Saturday. This is not the first time that a Chinese team has won first place in the Dota 2 tournament. Since 2011, Chinese players have come out on top 3 times. The overall prize pool for this year's event is more than $20 million, which marks the biggest prize in esports history. As champions, Wings Gaming took home $9 million, making them instant millionaires.
The prize money's huge figure is a reflection of the esports industry's high-speed growth.
In recent years, the world has seen booming growth in esports. The prospect for this field looks promising. The global revenue for esports is expected to increase from nearly $200 million in 2014 to more than $1 billion in 2019. Worldwide esports audience in 2019 is anticipated to reach 345 million people. That's up from 204 million in 2014. In China, esports has gradually grown into a huge industry as well. The number of esports consumers nationwide is expected to hit 280 million in 2018. Meanwhile, 180 million people are expected to watch live esports in 2018. That's up from 50 million in 2015.
I'm amazed with what I'm seeing here in China, You are the center of esports in the globe.
The trend cannot be ignored. Back in 2003, esports became the 99th official sports event in China. Following this, esports has gradually received recognition as a game by the Chinese government. Once known as an addiction for juveniles, esports has certainly come a long way and is looking prepared to stay.
And for more on China's esports industry, we are now joined in the Beijing studio Glavis Yang, COO of China's Gaia Mobile. Welcome to our program. Also in Los Angeles, we're having Eric Schiffer, CEO of Matriarch Equity as well. Welcome, sir, Mr. Schiffer. So, may I begin by asking you, Mr. Yang, so how come China has become so good with esports, winning championships over the past 3 years? Wow.
Well, it's not that only this year. You can see if you check the history of the victory, there's a lot of winning from the Chinese team. So esports is getting more and more popular, definitely in China market.
Yeah. How come?
Well, I gotta say, especially for young generation, they're once they they have more experience in gaming, they get more addictive to I think to the esport because it's more fun, it's more attractive than any other genre of the gaming.
Mr. Schiffer, I don't know whether you're familiar with the Chinese scenes or not. It certainly has become such a debate in the Chinese society whether kids should play a lot of computer games or in other ways esports or not. What do you make of it?
Well, look, it's a debate not just in China, but I think also in the United States. I have two girls, and they love to play, and so now it becomes a much harder argument when you have these kind of prizes. I mean, it's enormous, and I think it's only going to get bigger, frankly. I think we're just seeing the earliest stages of what is going to be a phenomenal area of growth, and China's been leading it. And I think certainly with the switch to mobile, I think you're going to see even bigger opportunities for players and certainly for the industry overall. It's a fascinating time. It really is.
How big is China's industry, esports industry?
Oh, I don't know how big it is, but it's definitely fast growing right now. Well, comparing to the previous years, this year, like you can see, there's a lot of tournaments happening in China, in like Shanghai, Shenzhen, Beijing. There's a lot of tournaments there, and we also, for our company, we have one game. It's called Ace Arena. In China, it's called Battle for Freedom. We cover with WCA to play the tournament, although in China nationally, yeah.
But the question is, how much do you think you will be able to tell between a professional player and also an amateur? All the kids, including the two daughters of Mr. Schiffer, could certainly use the name of becoming a professional to play computer games all the time. So how do you identify which one is belonging to which group? And from your perspective, I'm sure you're pretty good with it as well and developing the product. So where do you think the product is going? How is it going to, in a way, interact with this social debate that we have about what computer games are really doing to our next generation?
Well, before, I think for gaming, you're pretty much like you play with a computer, but nowadays it's become more interactive. So people can play with people, and people competitive with each other. So it's more, I think, for this kind of genre, it's more attractive than the previous type of gaming. Yeah.
What is it you say?
It's more attractive than.
Well, certainly it is more attractive, but however, it does not solve the problem of the debate that we have going on right here, which is, on the one hand, there are a lot of kids that really like it, including adults, probably like us, and also there are those debates suggesting computer games taking up so much time of the younger generation. They were distracted, and there have been problems. There have been problems with many individuals, in fact. So how can you, on the one hand, be able to see clearly the growing path of esports in China? On the other hand, knowing how this development is interacting with the social debate that I just mentioned.
Well, from my point of view, I don't think the
a developer's perspective,
yeah,
right?
right. From my point of view, I don't think the gaming will like a bad habit for people. Everything has if you are addicted to it, there's a bad effect or side effect. But if you deal with the gaming in a proper way, they definitely help you grow a lot of good habits. Like for esports, you need to know how to cooperate with your team members. You need to have a spirit of team working, and you need to have a mindset of never give up. You need to practice to be perfect. All this stuff is really benefit a lot in the real life. So I don't think the gaming is a bad habit.
All right, but what about Mr. Schiffer? What about never giving up esports and yet giving up on all the other things?
Look, I think it's like anything else, as you have to consider the balance. And certainly, he's right. There are certain skills that you definitely will build. I mean, you can absolutely improve in terms of discipline and achievement mindset. So there are things that kids are getting from it. But I think that it needs to be in perspective. We certainly don't want them to stop their education. We certainly don't want young people to not want to socialize. But the other good thing about these sport games is that they can socialize. They tend to do it in groups. I think that's part of why it's popular. And certainly why it's one of the reasons it's popular in China is it's done as a team. I mean, they'll go into an internet cafe and you'll have groups of teams competing against the other team in the cafe, and everyone's talking, and they're part of this together. So it's a social process. It's a social set of interactions that happen beyond just looking at the screen.
Yes, indeed. But there has been a lot of investment into this.
Yeah.
Some were even suggesting whether there is a huge bubble already thriving at this moment concerning the industry. What do you make of it, Mr. Yang?
Well, if you see that in the past few years, the market is very hot. A lot of investors invest in this industry. They think that the net profit rates are high. The intangible assets light is very lucrative. But if you check in this years, the market is pretty much cooling down comparing to the other years. Because when there's so many games coming to the market, the gamers want a good quality game. They don't want like the low cost game. They want good quality picture, good design. All of this stuff, like for us, when we develop a game, a fancy game, and deliver to the market, we need to, design or develop it over more than 1 year. And we are having like more than 100 engineers to work on this game. So it's not that lucrative anymore like the last year's. Like you just cash out 2 times or double times, multiple times in just a short time. So right now it's much more, the market is patient and more rational to work on, to take a look at this.
Is that also the global trend, Mr. Schiffer?
I think the global trend is in its infancy. I think when you look at these sites like Twitch, that was purchased by Amazon for $1 billion. And it's just tremendously being used by youngsters and kids to watch people actually playing games. And then when you consider the growth of what these tournaments are actually providing people, these prizes now are bigger than some of the major sports prizes in the world. So again, I think we're in the earliest stages. This is now the new hottest thing amongst the young people. It's not going to go away. I think the market will track with that. I think you're going to see great companies continue to emerge that will do extremely well. I think from an investor standpoint, again, it really depends on the company that you pick, but the industry trend is a big one. It's not going away, especially when you consider that virtual reality is going to now at some point get involved. And so it's going to only get that much more immersive and frankly for kids, that much more addictive.
It is getting extremely attractive because of virtual reality and some of the other new technologies. How fast do you think these will emerge together with, combined together with, of course, the developing of the esports industry? And how successful will that be? How much cash will have to be pumped into this in order to make sure they can be combined well? That is the question.
Well, it's a good question. I gotta say, this year is the original year for VR stuff.
Yeah.
The hardware just released to the market, Oculus and HoloLens. But still, you can see that many, developer doesn't have too many contents to deliver into the hardware platform. So I think it's still a long way to go, but I think gaming company will keep an eye on it. Like for us, we also invest some VR company right now. But still, if you want to be, profitable from this, the platform is still, I think, a way to go.
Mr. Schiffer, we see the trend of innovation. At the very beginning of every experiment, there tends to be a lot of trashy stuff being developed to occupy the market. Only when it's becoming ever more matured, the real good stuff, good content become the predominant forces of the market. How far are we really from there? Once again, are we really seeing a bubble at this moment? How dangerous is this bubble? How big is it, even though we're at an infant stage, as you just said?
Well, look, I think from an investor standpoint, if you're really interested in the industry from a long-term perspective, then it's somewhat irrelevant. Short-term, I think you can make an argument that it may be a bubble, but long-term, virtual reality, esports, mobile gaming, these are huge industries that are just beginning. And he's right, your guess is right, that the content is still fairly sparse. But when it begins to really turn on, and it's starting here, I mean, certainly in Silicon Valley and in parts of China, it's just now you're beginning to see what is going to be available to people, and it's mind-blowing, frankly. And I think that for people that have been involved in esports, when you combine that with virtual reality, it's a whole other arena now. And but from an investor standpoint, long-term, still great industries. Short-term, yes, I think you could make an argument that there may be some valuation issues.
Well, even though there are evaluation issues, there are certainly a lot of money in this pool. $5.1 billion on virtual reality gaming hardware. That is the number from the Super Data Research. It's certainly a lot of big money over there. Having said that, though, it is not just the businesses that are interested in the industry, but also the government now. Even the Chinese government, over the past decade, esports has gradually received the governmental recognition in this country, in China, especially by the General Administration of Sports. 2003, it was first recognized as an official sports program. And in 2008, the time when China hosted the Olympic Games in Beijing, it was listed at number 78 in China's official sports program. By the year 2013, a national esports team was founded. 2014, World Cyber Arena, a dedicated esports arena, was launched in Yanchuan in Ningxia Autonomous Region. 2016, this year, the Chinese Ministry of Culture created the Mobile Esports Game Association. You can see different Chinese ministries are pretty much engaged in this area. What does government coming in mean for your industry?
Well, for me, I gotta say that it's a good news for the industry because the government helped us to standardize a lot of things for the industry company. Before, it's kind of like chaos, a lot of copycat problem, a lot of some other issues with copyright. So right now, government helps us to create a very healthy environment ecosystem. Then everybody can play and follow the rules, and yeah. It's a good news, I think.
So what about the future, Mr. Schiffer? Is it going to be about the innovative capabilities, or is it going to be about the market share that's likely to decide where the industry is going? And as a result, which country is likely to be the biggest player? Can we see some of the key players now in the industry becoming ever bigger? Are they going to dominate? Are there going to be newcomers, new kids on the block that's actually going to play much more active roles?
Well, I think when you consider what has happened already, look, I think, when you consider China, for instance, with the government now legitimizing this whole concept of esports, again, as I said, we're in the infancy stages. I absolutely believe that you will see far greater growth. I think the innovations that will come, as I said, in virtual reality, combined with esports and the demographic. I mean, that's the trend. You have these young kids all around the world that love this stuff. And that's not going away. I mean, I can attest to it from what I see with my daughters. I can attest to it with kids that I follow, and certainly I can tell from Twitch and the stats that you see in China, this is a long-term trend, and so I absolutely believe we're in the infancy stages. I think investors can do very well long-term, and you're going to see the shape of things to come.
Okay.
The players that are currently in, I think will be far bigger, far greater than what we're seeing now.
All right, Edgar Schiffer and Glavis Young, thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Great to have you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.